everybody. Hope you're having a good day today. And it's going to be a nice day here. My only problem is everything's budding out and my allergies are making me crazy. So, other than having to deal with that issue, things are going along just fine. All right. The title of the lesson today is called Leaving the Culture. And when you start speaking about culture, you talk about a lot of things, and it's kind of some sensitive things for some people, a lot of people, in fact. See, culture is described as behaviors and manners of various groups designated by, it could be ethnic or financial, political backgrounds, or something that they have in common. And we've heard expressions like the drug culture, the prison culture, the youth culture, and anything that goes against normal standards in society. And even within different segments of society, they have different types of cultures. Like when you start talking about music, you have the pop culture and the rock culture and the rap culture and the country culture and stuff like that. And they all have their unique attributes about them. And so there's many types of cultures, and we will discuss a few of them because there's really just more than you can just imagine if you start writing them down on a piece of paper. But in every culture, the standards for right and wrong are always determined by the people of that culture. And never is the divine standard, the Bible, used to control behavior or belief of the people. Yet, strangely, the people of some of these cultures claim a belief in a higher power, but yet they don't live like they believe in that higher power. And so we know there's many cultures and beliefs around the world. And each culture is unique in several ways, yet generically speaking, they're all somehow the same. I mean, they're all basically do their own thing and they do not follow God's standards. And so even the society we live in has many cultures, and one of those we live in is considered a sexual culture. I mean, everywhere you go, the sexual agenda is promoted and tolerated. Advertising is promoted by sexual allurements and sexual statements. And just look at some of the advertising, you wonder why these beautiful people are used to sell mortgages, language learning software, and auto insurance. Really. A lot of commercials use the beautiful people to sell products like ice cream, beer, and toothpaste. And many news networks hire the most attractive people just for the purpose of attracting an audience. And so these are all gimmicks and these are all tools, but a lot of people are just so wrapped up in it, yeah, they get to see it. A lot of these people, they'll see an advertisement and they'll forget who the advertisement was for, or what company it was about, or what it was about, but they'll remember the cleavage and the legs and stuff like that from that advertisement. And that's the problem that we have. And then, of course, we have different ethnic groups have their own cultures all around. They have their ways of doing things, and we look and see, no, they're not following the divine standard. Let's look at the culture in the Middle East, and in many of their cities and all, they have a culture where they just teach their children to strap on bombs and go into crowded marketplaces and detonate an explosive device, killing many others. And such cultures teach hatred for the other groups. And that is how the children grow up. And that is really sad, but let's face it, that's in many cultures. They are taught hatred. And whether it's white, black, brown, yellow, or based on religious orientation or whatever, a lot of cultures teach hatred of the other cultures and the other peoples, or actually anybody that's not in their culture. See, sometimes ethnic cultures seem to put pressure upon its people to conform to standards that are many times detrimental to their own health and well-being. Get involved in the drugs. You have to do that. You have to go around and act like a certain individual. You know, you see the cities, you see the guys walking around with their pants dropped down to their knees and walking around their underwear. I mean, that's just the culture. And some people say it's harmless, but let's face it, why follow that? And in many large cities, there are dozens of shootings. We hear about them all the time. And as a result, such shootings, there are many funerals. And there's a lot more than we hear about, that's for sure. Every week in Chicago, they have shootings, and as a result, they have funerals. And it just seems that the culture of that society has accepted that to be the normal case. And life goes on for them. See, when one tries to break away from their culture, the others start calling them names and almost try to shame them into being something the local culture expects. I mean, some appear to want to be a culture of being thugs, drug dealers, and any other vices that one can imagine. And when someone doesn't want to be a part of that, yeah, they make fun of them, sometimes pick on them, sometimes persecute them, and sometimes even kill them. And we've seen what happens when one tries to leave their culture. We've seen the shows on TV. What happens when a gang member decides to get out? Well, chances are he's got a mark on himself, and he's going to die. And other types of people try and get out of their culture. You know, if they leave that culture from the Middle East and try and become a Christian, I mean, what happens to them? Yeah, they get put to death. And so some people try and break away from their culture. And of course, many cultures behave out of selfish desires by the individual. Sometimes one or more individuals might direct them, and such behavior is just accepted as normal. I mean, they go along. In other words, a lot of people are living in fear of their local culture, and they don't want to upset the waves, so they just go along with it. And we also see in politics wrapped up in a culture of things. One reporter called it the culture of corruption. And that's what it's into. See, a lot of politicians go to their capitals or their places where they're going to lead, where they represent the people, with good intentions. And then they get caught up and wrapped up in the prevailing culture of the norm. In the meantime, nothing seems to get accomplished, but somehow the politicians get richer. And it appears that the voters know their politicians are corrupt, but they do not seem to bother them. They don't care. As long as people get to do what they want to do, they're not going to try and go through and make any changes. See, cultures vary from house to house and street to street. It varies according to ethnic areas and backgrounds. It varies according to upbringing and training. But like I said, the standard of acceptable behavior is always determined by the members of each culture. Rarely is the divine standard of behavior practiced or encouraged. I mean, I'm talking about the divine standard, the rules from the Bible, what the Bible teaches. And that is why it is difficult for people to be converted into something different. For a sinner to be converted into a Christian means that they must change their culture. And it's almost like they become a traitor to their cultures, and that's what they're called, a traitor. And that can be very dangerous, and they're afraid to leave that. And they're told to change their culture from that which has been for so long natural for them into something that is not normal for them. All right, so see, the truth is that no stature in culture is going to save the soul. Only following the divine standard can do that. So change is the major factor in repentance. And we know it is. That's what it means. It means a change of direction and a change of behavior. And usually it is driven by a remorse and sorrow that we're supposed to have. That's what we call godly sorrow. And what it happens is it goes from sin to righteousness, which is anti-cultural for many people. Yet if people want to be saved, they will make the necessary changes. Yes, it can be difficult for them, but it can be done. And we see this in the divine pages of the Bible. Remember, the Jewish culture kept many from becoming Christians. You remember in John chapter 9, and many wanted to confess Jesus, but they were afraid of the leadership because they were told they would be put out of the synagogue. And so many, even though they believed, did not confess him. And so those in that culture who became Christians still got caught up in the hatred for the Gentiles, which they always harbored, and they tried to keep their culture alive in their new religion. They tried to force people into standards that were no longer required by God. All right, so God holds each and every person accountable for what they do, what they believe, what they teach, and what they practice. And we know the standard of judgment is going to be the Bible. Jesus told that the words that I speak will judge you in the end. And that's going to be one of the books that are open that we read about in Revelation 20. And books were opened. Yeah, one of those books is the Bible. The Bible presents the standard by which we're going to be judged. And so we know the standard of judgment is the Bible. And we know that our names must be in the Lamb's Book of Life. And how do we get our names there? Well, by obedience to the gospel. And then, of course, living faithfully. So the only way to get our names into the Lamb's Book of Life is to get out of the culture that we're in and change into a godly culture. And that's the only way it's going to happen. And so, yeah, the culture does need to be changed. And many times with many cultures, someone has to leave the culture in order to make the necessary changes. And we know from history and past history, people who leave their culture, yes, they become targets. They become people who are killed and things like that. And it's really sad that culture has become so strong in our world. But none of those cultures are going to help people except a godly culture that asks people to conform to the divine standard. And that's where we need to get ourselves. Some of us, and I'm sure many of you listening to this message, have already made that change in your life, and you realize the difficulty of leaving your culture. Some people have to change their religious backgrounds and things like that, and they're ostracized and made fun of by their families and their friends. I mean, it's difficult, but we know what's waiting for us. There is something far greater, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that peace that comes from God. We're looking for that hope of salvation, and that's why we have the courage to change our culture and leave the former culture behind. You know, Ephesians 2 and Colossians 3 talks about leaving the old culture, leaving the old life, and putting on the new life. And that's what we need to do. So that's our lesson. I mean, just something to consider. And if you think this message is important, share it with others. I mean, others probably need to hear this. And I see several of you are speaking, and actually one of you speaking from Indonesia. I mean, you live in a culture that's very Muslim, and trying to get out of that culture is very difficult and even very dangerous. So consider all these thoughts and look at this, and let's pray that we can get people to realize that their culture is not good for their soul, and maybe we can get them to change. So let's do what we can. Every day we need to get out and do something for God and help God in his goal of helping people get to heaven. That's all it comes down to. All right, Lord willing, we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.